Can you name one area in which the Ukrainians or NATO would have an advantage over Russia in terms of weapon systems? And the reason I ask, I can't. I looked at it the other day. I said, okay, how many main battle tanks, modern, main battle tanks were built in 2024 for all of NATO and in Russia? The answer that came back was the Russians built 60 to 80. NATO built zero. I mean, all of NATO, but the South Koreans built 56 that they sold to the Poles. It's like,
well, I'm somebody that doesn't emphasize individual technologies or platforms as much, and I don't think the Russians do as well. I think that they rapidly adapt platforms. I mean, you've seen this thing they call the Terminator.
Yeah.
Brilliant device. That's something you should have in your hip pocket as a battalion commander in the battlefield. Bring up the Terminator, blast it, and move on. I mean, I would love something like that. But having said that, let me go back a little bit. In 1983, 84, 85, I was in graduate school. In 86, at one point, thanks to a friend of mine, his name was Bill Odom. I don't know if you've ever.
Yeah. No, I remember. Yeah.
And he was a mentor, so to say, intellectually, and he arranged for me to go to Andy Marshall's office, not to work for Marshall, but he said, what I want you to do is that I want you to read all the Soviet General Staff journals. So I got the super cosmic, top secret, compartmentalized everything. And I began reading through this material. And one of the things that I found very, very informative that I think we've seen again on the battlefield with the Russians, and we don't appreciate this today at all. NATO has absolutely no idea. But the Soviet historians and military analysts went back and looked at the Allied forces during the Second World War. And they compared them with Soviet forces. They also looked at the Germans, but mostly the Allies. And they said the Allies never had any chance of winning against anybody who knew what they were doing. And I said, well, that's quite an interesting comment. And of course, the Russians, at that time, the Soviets, they were very proud of their so-called victory in the war, which was by no means an easy victory at all.
Right.
They had a lot of problems. But one of the things that they did understand very well was this thing that we call unity of effort. And that meant that every organization, every formation in the Soviet military was organized, trained, and equipped in the same way. And that at every level, all the way up, from the top to the bottom, there was always one man in command. Now, sure, there were political officers there, but if you go back and look at the history, by 1942, 43, people said, screw these guys, shut up and color in the corner. And the military took over. But what they did is that they understood that you could have Polish-speaking divisions in the Soviet army, but you could not have any Polish Army Corps, any Polish formations, armies, or anything else inside the Soviet army. Everybody had to be Sovietized.
Right.
The Germans didn't do that either. The Germans treated their Hungarian, Romanian, Italian allies very carefully. I mean, people don't realize this. They let them do largely what they wanted to do, and the Soviets said, well, that's stupid. Then they're more burden and an asset. Well, when you look at NATO, as I try to explain to people militarily, it's like a herd of cats.
Yes.
16 cats. Come on into the room. And you see 8 cats never come through the door. Why won't the cats come through the door? Well, this is the nature of NATO. Well, that more than anything else, the absence of a unified military command structure, the absence of uniformity in training, tactics, organization, doctrine, that more than anything else is death on the battlefield. So if we were to face the Russians at this point, we would be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, their concept of the general staff, we had the joint chiefs of staff, but that's not a, as that's a domestic version of NATO, I guess.
Well, the other thing is the Soviets and the Russians do this now. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. And you're spot on about the Russian general staff. The Russians, even under the czars, were very sensitive to the requirement to find high human capital as commanders and also staff officers and bring them in and take care of them and nurture them Now, it was much better under the Soviets than it had been under the Tsars. Soviets did a much better job, but then again, they were pretty damn desperate. If you look at the people at the top that are they're making all the plans, and all these names, I didn't come prepared to talk about it, but in my book, Margin of Victory, you can read a chapter about it, and I cover a lot of this on the Soviet side. But the people that you end up running the show out of Moscow as one group, very, very, very skilled, highly intelligent, well-trained, eye for detail for everything that's required, as good as the German general staff.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have something else that happens on the battlefield because they'd had so many losses and so many reverses. They suddenly picked people that had the steadiness of nerve and character and determination to stay and fight come hell or high water. They then become what I call the long ball hitters. So when there's a decision, we're going to have an and I have a whole chapter on the destruction of Army Group Center. And when they make the decision, we're going to launch offensives in these areas, you bring in these headquarters that will command the various armies and fronts. And you have one command structure, two command structures, three, divided up into three, say all going into Eastern Poland or Western White Russia. And these are the best, most experienced, competent battlefield commanders who are simultaneously at the top, led by clearly the very best and most competent general staff officers.
Yeah.
We never did anything like that. We don't do anything like that now. We promote Billy Bob because Billy Bob, he's a good guy and a real war fighter. You get a lot of Billy Bobs. Or we promote somebody else for some other damn stupid reason. And there are no tests. There are no examinations. One of the things that Putin did after he took over, and he went through this big effort to reform the army. It failed. So he stopped, said, okay, that's not worked. We're going to change it. We're going to do something else. They set up a separate school for commanders. And that place was designed to sift out who was an idiot and who was actually competent. We don't make those efforts.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have all these sort of pre-digested future great men that were somebody's aide de camp, somebody's chief executive officer, somebody's speechwriter.
Yeah, the politics of it. I mean, I scripted exercises for JSOC and SOCOM over 23 years. So, when I started, I think Garrison was like a lieutenant colonel or a colonel at the time, and I just, you saw how politics played a more important role than actual competence, I guess is what I'm saying.
But at the same time, let's be frank, we know that even if you do most things right most of the time, things can still go wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
But you still have a better shot at recovering from the mistake if you have competent people than if you do not. And so this business of watching offensive after offensive after offensive launched by the Ukrainians into the teeth of these Russian defenses, without regard to the paradigm shift in warfare, the connectivity between the overhead surveillance, terrestrial and satellite-based, and all of the strike systems, which, as you know, on the Russian side are being masked.
Right.
Not necessarily hub to hub as you had during the Second World War. No, they're dispersed, but they're all masked effectively. And then you have a change in the force so that the force is not sitting there in World War II style fronts. They're dispersed, but they can concentrate and then disperse again as required. All of these things are happening. And what are we doing? We're refighting World War II.